What are we going to talk about today? Well, several things have changed in Apex, especially in 20.2. I think I really like this release, and I feel like it's as a developer, I feel like it's really starting to become a good time for us in Apex. For the longest time, and I think accurately so, Apex has adopted the declarative low code methodology. It's always been possible for developers to kind of interject their their code when necessary, but sometimes in order to do that, it was never always a fun experience. And I feel like, especially with this release, a lot more attention has really been kind of turned at the developer, um, the more developer Apex developer, right? So it's there's still lots of goodies for the business analyst style developer or the manager style developer, but we got a lot of really wonderful goodies for those who like to play around in the code a little more. So, what are we going to talk about? Well, a new style was dropped, the Redwood UI. It's taking over Oracle. It's kind of the new branding there. So, of course, that's going to show up in Apex. As mentioned, there's several enhancements from the developer's perspective that I absolutely love. The new cards region was introduced, and I like this take that the Apex team is starting to approach in that we used to, everything was, if you've taken any of my trainings, you know that I always, when we get to the point where we get to classic reports, I kind of belabor the point. We need more classic reports because, no, not everything needs to look just like data. But sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to work with in that you have to understand all these different templates and you have to know how to craft your query correctly. And the cards region really helps kind of solve that specifically for cards in that we just map the card region to a data set and we kind of nominate and pick different things that we'd like to use. Report printing has been absolutely fantastic, and I think Menno did a super awesome job in providing us with an API that we can leverage to provide our own custom printing or interaction with the printing engine. And then, of course, faceted search got some very helpful improvements, and we're going to go over all of these things. Now, if I forget something or if I missed a new feature or something that you were very excited to learn more about, I will say that there is a link here, and I guess I can put that in chat. I'll give that to Lino. And this is the Apex team going over some of the new features. And if you want another perspective, please, go ahead and check that out. All right. So what exactly is Redwood and this new UI? As mentioned, it's kind of the standard direction of Oracle at large. So all the different components that Oracle is providing kind of has this unified Redwood theme. It's no longer that that bright, jarring red. Yay! But in providing this new Redwood UI, one thing that was introduced that I thought was pretty interesting and noteworthy is the fact that there's a newer technology called CSS variables. And a CSS variable is just a way for us to declare a value in our CSS files and to reuse them. And we can kind of mutate and change those values, and they have an impact on the way that our page looks. And Redwood leverages this feature immensely. And so because Redwood is using it, and Apex is using it, well, then you can maybe consider using these yourself in the code that you write. So let's take a quick look at the Redwood UI. And then let's also take a look at CSS variables and kind of what's going on there. All right, hop over here. This is kind of the new Redwood UI. And if you were to install Apex 20.2, fire up your old application, it would continue to look the way that it did, prior to 22. And we're going to need to go ahead and update your theme. And the easiest way to do that is actually, since I already updated this, we won't be able to see the notification. But if I edit my application and I hop over to my shared components, you'll get a big reminder up here at the top. It'll let you know that, hey, your themes, universal themes out of date. Why don't you go ahead and update that? And there'll be a nice little button for you to interact with. And that's literally all you need to do to get the most recent version of the universal theme. But that will not give you the Redwood style. Of course, if you want to get the style, that has this modification or this procedure has not changed in a while. We're going to pop open our theme roller, and we would just go ahead and pick the Redwood light theme, and then we'd get this look and feel here. I just wanted to have a couple different regions here with a few different accents just to give you an idea of what the different region accents look like. And I really like them. I like what's going on here. It's more dynamic. It's not quite as flat as what we've seen with the Vita styles of the universal theme. But I had mentioned this thing about CSS variables, and I want to just kind of show them to you so you can see what I'm talking about. If I was to inspect this page, and I'll just right click and inspect element. Doesn't really matter where I look. And I'm gonna, over here, I have my little rules inspector. And this will just tell me kind of the CSS that's kind of being used to make this page look the way that it does. And something kind of interesting is gonna happen. If I scroll down to the bottom, or actually, as I start scrolling, we're gonna start to see these things here. This like CV border width, CV border color. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure of what all these different variables map to, but you can rest assured that they definitely map to the different components that are on the screen in some way, shape, or form. And for the most part, I don't think you necessarily want to be messing with these specific variables because these are Apex, these kind of like under the hood Apex things that are helping this theme function. So unless you really know what you're doing, you probably want to leave these specific variables alone. But I want to show you at least how a variable, CSS variable works and how you could use it. And if I scroll down way to the bottom, you can just see there's all these different variables here that are being set. There's whole bunches of them. Okay. All right. So how would you approach using a CSS variable? All right, so you can see I have this kind of like tomato salmony colored content. I kind of have this darker content here, and I've done this using CSS variables. The main goal here is not like an amazing aesthetic. It's just the core technology. Let me go ahead and edit this page and just see what's going on. The only difference between these two regions, this is just a regular static content region, nothing fancy here. But this dark content, all that I've done is I've given it a class of dark. So that just gets added. So then what's controlling the way that these look? Well, what's interesting about this page is that if I go to the inline CSS of this page, we're just going to take a quick look here. You can see that I've defined on the root node, this is like in the case of HTML, this is the HTML node. I've defined a color and I've given it my own, I've defined my own variable and I called it SB primary color. And I've given it this tomato color. What I've also done is I've said that, okay, I'm going to make this dark class. And if that dark class is present, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the SB primary color. Notice this is exactly the same name. This is kind of like updating my variable. And I'm saying I'm going to update my variable to be this darker color. And then ultimately, all of my region bodies are going to use whatever the primary color happens to be set to for them. So what's interesting about this is that all of my region bodies are going to be kind of this tomatoey color, unless I've given them the class dark. And the last thing that I'm really going to mention about this, and the reason why I think this is fairly significant, is that I'm able to do this in a way where I don't have to truly understand a lot of the hierarchy of the HTML that's been written, and I don't have to write complex selectors to kind of activate these different properties. It's all very simple, organized selectors, and I like that methodology to approaching CSS. So if you do want to approach writing custom CSS, you should consider taking a look at CSS variables. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows here. As it turns out, CSS variable means you're going to be dropping support for some older browsers, most notably IE. But this is what the Apex team has already said in the release of 20.2. So if we go look at the official release, browser requirements, it says here, Oracle Application Express requires JavaScript-enabled browsers and supports the current and prior major releases of Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Edge. Notice that IE is not listed there. So if for some reason you have to use IE, I'm sorry to hear that, but some of these newer features aren't going to really work right for you. And actually, you might not even really be able to upgrade to 20.2. So that's pretty sad. In fact, I've already had a couple customers be in that situation. They want to upgrade, but they can't. And if you're curious where to get this type of information, there's a very helpful website called caniuse.com. And you can look up all sorts of features, and it'll show you kind of where those features will be supported or not. Now, on to my next, I think this is arguably my favorite set of enhancements. And that is the Apex team. They use Apex to build applications, so they understand the pain points that or the struggles that sometimes we have when trying to use the tool, because they're actively using it as well. And so it's also in their best interest to try to make the tool as usable as possible, because it makes their lives easier. So a couple small things. The attributes node has been moved, and it's kind of one of those things where, like, when they made the change, it's like, oh yeah, why wasn't it always like that? This makes so much sense. But I do like to think of that as kind of one of those situations where you build a solution to how you think it's going to work, what you think is the right way. And then after you use it and you kind of feel it out, you go, oh, I need to tweak this a little bit, and I think it'd be better if I did this. And that's actually something that I teach all my students, is that don't be scared to get something out there and have it be a little bit wrong. Make sure it's usable and it meets the core requirements. But it can be a little bit wrong. That's okay. And then after we've realized kind of a better way to use it, you'll make that modification. And I think that's the story of the attributes node. And we'll take a look at that here in a second. We have a new code editor, the Monaco Editor. Oh my goodness, is this not one of the best change ever? This gives us a extreme workhorse for writing code inside of our browser. I suspect we have barely scratched the surface of what this editor is going to allow us to do inside of our Apex application. So I'm really curious to see where the Apex team takes this. And I'm going to demo a couple things about that I like. And then we're also going to take a quick look at some changes and features that have been added to items. So first and foremost, the attributes node has moved, and we can see here that I'm selecting my employee details region. This is a form. And when I select it, notice that if I want to get to the region-specific attributes, there's this actual node here that I click on. And yeah, so just note that if you want to get to the region-specific attributes, you're going to find it right up here. It's no longer going to be dangling off of this region to click on. And it's always kind of weird the first time you realize the muscle memory that you have for clicking on that attributes region when you upgrade to 20.2, because you keep looking over here for something that you're not going to find. The Monaco Editor. And what's great about the Monaco Editor is that it's actually the editor that's used to power Visual Studio Code. So if you've seen me or other individuals use Visual Studio Code, so I'll kind of pop up a screen here. Let me make a new thing, close that. This editor here, its core features have been imported into Apex. And so there's certain commands that I like to use. So if I have the same name in a couple different places, for example, I could use Control D to go ahead and select all those and interact with those. And you'll notice that those same commands will work inside of Apex. And I want to go ahead and show you these features now. So I have this the Monaco editor, and I'd like to go ahead and open up my region. And notice that I have my editor open, and if I select emp here, I can do Control D, and it's going to go ahead and find that similar text just like it did in the other case. If I want to write a where clause here, and I want to bind to an item on my page, of course, if I say P, I guess I need to put that colon here, P, notice that I get my page item IntelliSense. We had something like this before. There's a subtle difference here in that before it would try to match your case, and this time it now always just leaves everything in uppercase. And while that's like a little subtle thing, I really like that because I like writing my bind variables in uppercase, and I would always have to convert that. But let's say, for example, you like writing your bind variables in lowercase, and you have some long variable names, and you don't want to have to type everything out to get it back into lowercase. Well, it turns out that we can use the commands palette. And to use the command palette, I can just press F1, and this little command palette opens up to interact with this code editor. And one such command that I could do is I could say lower and transform to lowercase. It's going to take whatever I currently have selected and transform to lowercase. Hey, not bad. One thing that it doesn't do that I wish it would do, an enhancement that I would enjoy, is that it doesn't keep like a local history of the commands that you typically use. Because in the local version of Visual Studio Code, if I was to open up this command, at the very tippy top would be the transform to lowercase, because it's the last command that I used. It kind of keeps a little running history for you. So who knows, maybe we'll get something like that in the future. The other thing that we can do that I really like, I have a couple shortcuts that I want to run through, is that, well, to open the command palette, we get F1, but we can slide code around. I'll do that in a second. We can copy lines very easily with Alt-Shift up and down. And we can do box selection, which is very, very helpful. And that's Control Shift and then, or sorry, Alt Shift, and then you left click and drag. Or you can click somewhere, Alt Shift, click somewhere. And then, of course, something very, very helpful is toggling comments. I use toggle comments all of the time when I'm testing and playing with my predicates and my where clause. And sometimes I'll copy or I'll comment out several of them because my query's not working correctly. And then one by one, I'll add each line back in and see where maybe I have a problem. So let me just quickly run through these because I think they're pretty cool. So sometimes we like to reorder columns. And so you're probably familiar with maybe you select your line, cut it, go down to the new spot, paste, and then you have to go back up and delete that, right? There's little ways that you can make that happen when you're trying to reorganize your code. If I just hold Alt and up and down arrow, I can just move this line wherever I want it to be, and it just kind of slides around. So awesome. If maybe I want to format higher date slightly differently, I should be able to say, I think Alt Shift, and I can just press my down arrow to clone that line. And maybe I just want the year or something like that. I'll add a different level of formatting to this in some way. Maybe I want to add aliases to all of these columns, and based off of and maybe I want to use these column names as like an input to the new alias. So what I could do is I could click up at the top here, and I believe it's Alt Shift, and then I'll click down here, and I did make a box selection, but I could, if I click up here and then Alt Shift, oops, sorry, Alt Shift, and click down here, I can actually, it will just select everything. One thing to watch out for though when you're using this box selection is mind the commas that might be at the end of the line, because typically what I will do is I'll say Alt Shift and I'll click down here, and then I could do Control Shift right arrow, copy to select this, and then I'll say as, and I can paste these values and I'll say like display, something like that. So I'm able to very quickly kind of use these columns to kind of build aliases or kind of build things out kind of in a systemic way. And it's also just make sure it lowers the risk of typos and things like that. And of course, I could Control Z all of this away and not worry about it. Cool. So Monaco Editor, super awesome. I cannot wait for more features and IntelliSense, and yeah, I cannot wait for this editor to just start going. See where it takes us. There's a couple item enhancements that I'd like to look at, and it's a client-side case adjustment, and also the added support for drop zone. So what exactly are those? Oops, stay here for a second. The client-side case adjustment is just a extension of some attributes that have been added to the text field, and I think text area, but I want to show you that it could kind of be added to anything, and I want to show you how. So what does that mean? Well, take a look. Leave this. That's fine. Oh, a typo there. Oh well. Here, I have a text field, and if I type here, it's always going to be in uppercase. And I need you to trust that I'm not pressing caps lock or shift or anything like that. And if I type in job here, clerk, it's always in lowercase. And there's a subtle difference here in how I implemented both of these things. And what this is if I go in and edit a particular item, I can have a text field. So first off, the type that I've selected is text field. And there's an option here called text case that I have set to upper. And that's not the only option. It's either upper or lower, or just don't change it. And so, because sometimes we want to normalize values to uppercase or lowercase, and this would do that. The other thing to keep in mind is to try to figure out, well, what exactly is this doing that makes this happen? Well, if we were to go take a look at this item, we're going to notice there's kind of this little attribute here, right here. It's called data text case. So data text case currently has a value of upper, and that makes it transform to uppercase. Well, what I could do is, if I had an item or a field and I wanted it to convert case for me, well, what I could do is I could edit my page. I could go find that item. And if I went down to my attributes, my custom attributes, I could add data text case. In this case, I added lower, and it kind of forces those values to be lowercase. Now, if there's a declarative option, should you use it? Yeah, absolutely. But if you're writing custom code and you want to try to leverage this feature, you can. This isn't necessarily documented, therefore not really use at your own risk, right? But I do think it's pretty interesting. There's also one other thing that I want to mention here, because I always think it's important that you make sure that the server has the final say, that things are true. And I just want to point out that if you do that, you have this client-side text interaction. Here I have my setting for ename, which is forcing it to always be uppercase. And then I have this computation here that runs before my validations or processing that says that I want to put the item back to lowercase. And just to be clear here, what's going to happen is this item will be entered into lowercase. So just by clicking that item, it doesn't add any sort of corresponding validation to ensure that what you want is true, or that it's going to be inserted into uppercase. If there's some mistake or something happens in the PL SQL backend and the value ends up somehow getting lowercase for some reason, then just be careful. Make sure all your validation and processing is in place. Okay. And then, of course, the other enhancement that we have here, there's added support for drop zone. And drop zone just looks a lot nicer. It's kind of a nice interaction to how we interact with file uploads. And just to show you this real quickly, a drop zone. What I can do is I can either click to upload a file, and I could select an image, maybe this background image here, and I have one file selected. And if I try to control click, I'm trying to control click several options. Can I shift click? Nope, I can't really shift click. And it only lets me select one at a time. However, if you have an Explorer window open and you select multiple and then drag them in, then you can upload 2 files, right? Or multiple files, not just 2. It could be 3, 4, 5, whatever. So there are a couple different ways to interact with that drop zone. One thing that one slight modification that I've made with this particular item is that it has several different ways that you can have it presented on the screen. And this is the wizard format. If you'd like to change your format to be something a little bit different, you can. I'll go ahead and quick edit this item so we could see it. Okay. And we have our blob columns configured. And we have our layout here. Oh, is it? Oh, ha! forget where I changed that. Well, that's okay. Just note that I did change this from the default settings. There's an option in here that allows you to, oh, maybe it's this. Yeah, all right. Display as, I set it to block drop zone, which kind of has this wizard style display, which I like. But initially, you can have the inline drop zone, and I'll say save and run. And it kind of looks more like this from the beginning. Cool. Cards region. Oh my goodness, is this not really cool? So cards and compact ways of displaying information and flexible ways of displaying information, I think, are very important for the applications that we build. We need to be able to present kind of small bite-sized pieces of information that will allow the user to kind of drill down into more detailed information. And so that's generally the use case for cards. We kind of want to give them just the critical pieces of information to make some sort of decision. And then if they need to see more information, they can kind of drill in further. My favorite thing about this region is that we don't have to remember a specific type of query syntax, right? So if you've built cards in the past using the classic region or classic report, you'd pick the cards template, and then you'd have to carefully craft this query to get it to display the way that you wanted. And then you would also have to go in several times and carefully craft your own HTML markup just to move some small things around. So what I like about the cards region is that the Apex team has taken extra special care and attention to one of the most common workflows and modifications that we do to a card, and try to make all those declarative. One, which sounds so silly, but I love it, is adjusting the icon position. Sometimes you want the icon on the left. Sometimes you want the icon on the right. Sometimes you want the icon kind of like in the middle of the card. And it's very easy for us to make that happen. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple different adjustments and what I did to get the cards that we have on the screen I'm about to show you. Okay, so we have this cards region, and I think it looks kind of interesting. And there's a couple different things about this that I want to talk about, and that is adding icons, positioning icons, adding media, specifically this background image for the card. And we're also going to talk later about how we can add actions to our card and change exactly how that works. So let's go ahead and let's just dive into the settings of this region and pick it apart. Remember that when I click on my region, I have something here that I just want to point out. And this is a design pattern that I think can be helpful for larger projects. It's not really necessary for all projects, but when I'm working on a larger project, sometimes what I'll do is I'll make a view that has all sorts of extra columns that I want to use for my entities. And so, for example, this view that I have here, it has like some colors that it adds, some color columns that it adds some icon columns, and it just kind of adds helpful utility things that my UI might need to properly present information. So my Apex doesn't really own or control what my icon is going to be. My database is still in charge of that thing, and it provides information to Apex. It says here, this is what you should use. So just note that I have a couple extra columns here for icon and color and things like that. And notice I have this card, I'm using the cards type region. If I go to my attributes, we can see that the layout that we have at the moment is grid. I could adjust that, but I'm going to leave it grid for now. And notice that all I really had to do is I just come to the different aspect or property of the card that I'd like to have display, and I go ahead and I pick a column. that I'd like to map to that. And you can see here, there's my CSS class color and my CSS class icon. They're part of my view. My view is kind of deals with that for me. And you can see that I've mapped these columns through, and nothing really special here. The one thing that I will say is when I get to the icon and badges, notice that there's a couple different options that I can pick for how to display my icon. I could pick an image URL and not just show an icon, but instead have a nice looking image. And I love this. And the reason why I love this is because this was one of the common workflows or modifications that we would have. We'd have to go Google for how to, what code we have to write to embed an image in this part of my card. And you'd have to tweak all sorts of different settings. Yes, here, I guess you are tweaking some settings, but that's it, right? It's declarative. You just pick what you want, and Apex kind of figures out the rest for you. You don't have to play with a lot of CSS to make it happen. So for now, I'm just going to use the icon class column. I map that to the column that I've selected. One thing that I did notice though is if I pick icon class column, it does not specify font Apex for me. So I had to make sure that I added my own font Apex prefix. So if I get rid of this icon, this prefix here, and I say save and run, notice that my icons are all broken. I get these weird little, I get these weird broken icons, and that's no fun. Let's go back to our page, and I'm going to go ahead and put that back, FA, so it knows to use font Apex. So then now my icons will work. The other thing that I can do is I can adjust where exactly my icon is going to be. So I'm going to say top, just so it's kind of on the top of my card. Save and run. And we can see that the image or the icon now has moved. And just to show you what start looks like, I can change that. And start's going to kind of go kind of on this side. I'm not a huge fan of start in this layout, but anyway, you could change that. I'm going to go ahead and move it back to end just because that's how I like to see it. In terms of interacting with the card, well, that's what we have actions for over here on the right-hand side. If you want to create an action, you can right-click on the little actions node and say create action. I think you can right-click on the card and it should have, no, actually, clicking on the region will not let you create an action. You have to specifically go to the little actions node to make a new action. And I like this idea. I like this concept that Apex is starting to treat the actions or the interactions that we provide for our users as their own standalone component. And I can't help but think maybe this is going to start happening more. This is my own speculation. But I like this idea of being able to create an action. And I could almost even think of actions, like, wouldn't it be cool if actions were kind of like shared components and you could associate these like shared component actions with things? You could then integrate that with Spotlight Search and you could search for your actions. Oof, man, that'd be super cool. Anyway, that's all. Yeah, Lino, go ahead.
Just one thing, can you show us the query of that card region, just so people can understand how it's related to, if you can show just the code for it.
Oh, yeah. So let me go to SQL Workshop, SQL command, or Object Browser, use MPUIV, code. Give me one, or I think I clicked on that. Yeah, it takes a second here. I actually, believe it or not, I have a table called MPUI, and this is kind of cool. What the MPUI table does is it just stores metadata that's only related to UI stuff. Has nothing to do with the actual business data. It's just how I'm going to relay information to the UI. And if I was to look at that table, You can see it just has employee numbers and it has colors and class icons, and I can go in and I can change and modify this data on a per row basis if I wanted to. Or I could have, if I wanted to, I could have made this a case, some sort of case statement view and computed it on the fly. Those are the types of engineering decisions that you have to think of as a developer. Which one makes more sense? Which one do I want to maintain? Ultimately, I went with this because I figured these values aren't going to change very often. I don't want to have to keep computing them. If I just store them, then I think I'd have the most control. And you can always run update statements to update bulk or several records at once. And you have fine-grained control without necessarily having SQL statements that have all sorts of weird case statements and decodes and nonsense in them. I like code that just kind of works how it's supposed to. Sometimes that means making some extra objects in the database. Hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Tyson.
So with this card, I need to talk about the media, the background image. So let's go back here. And if I go to my attributes and scroll down, you can see there's this area here for media. There's lots of different ways that we can configure this. One thing that you have to watch out for, when I first picked this image URL as my source, notice that it's referencing app images. This was just an image that I uploaded to my shared components. I picked the position as background image, but by default, the sizing will be set to fit. And when I leave it as fit, it doesn't look right. My aspect ratio of my card doesn't match the aspect ratio of my image, and so I run into an issue. So in order to solve this issue, I want to make sure that all of the dimensions of my image meet the ends of its container. And the way that we do that is there's a special property that we use called cover. And as a side note about this, I am very happy that the properties that Apex provides, the names for these properties, are matching the actual CSS property names. There's a couple areas in Apex where the actual CSS property, or the way that the larger community refers to something, is different than how it's been kind of packaged inside of Apex. And so sometimes we get these layers of abstraction that allow us to not learn kind of what the proper names for certain things. Save and run. Okay, so now I have this back. All right. We have conditional actions, and so at the moment I have this button that on this card, and notice all my cards are the same size. Well, what I'm going to do is, if I edit this page and I go to my action that I've specified is a button, here I have a server-side condition that says, well, it only shows up if salary is less than or equal to 0. Or greater than or equal to 0. Well, I'm going to change this to 3,000 and save and run. And what we'll observe is that some regions have buttons and some don't. And notice that the cards all stay the same size. So if one row has a button, then all cards are tall. And then if no rows have a button, then all cards are smaller. Notice that these cards are smaller than these cards. And so that's a nice usage of Flex, I believe, is doing that for us. And the other thing that I want to point out is, notice that salary here. If you have a salary, then we'll display and we'll normally display information, sometimes not. And if you have a commission, I'll actually display commission in parentheses here. But so a clerk doesn't have commission, but a salesman does. President has just dashes here. What is going on? Well, this other part that I want to talk about is called template directives, and it's just an extension of the substitution syntax that we currently use in Apex. If I was to go in and take a look at my card region, and I go to my attributes. Okay. Here in my secondary body, I have this really weird looking thing. Here, you can see I have some template directives, and it's taking a look at the job column. And when the value is salesman, then it's going to go ahead and emit this value. When it's president, then it's going to go ahead and emit this value. Otherwise, it's going to go ahead and just it should emit salary. So you can see here that we have kind of an interesting configuration here where I didn't have to write any SQL to make this happen, which is kind of a double-edged sword in that, sure, I didn't have to write SQL, but I had to write this arbitrary syntax inside of my region to get that to happen. So we have to think about kind of where our strengths are and where we should put this complexity. Should it be in the template in the region, or should it maybe be in a query or view that kind of populates something, right? We're going to have a much more complicated view, but now Apex is dealing with the UI aspect of this. I don't know what the right answer is there. Really, it's for your group to decide what you want to use. There are several other template directives you can use, such as there's if statements and loops and all sorts of good stuff. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of that. Just acknowledge that they exist. And if you want to learn more, under the APIs on Apex Oracle Calm, there is a template directive link that you can follow. Report printing is absolutely been fantastic. It's very easy for us to now have a native printing solution. We don't have to install any third parties. It just sort of kind of works. And the icing on the cake here is that we also have a friendly API that we can integrate with if we want to do some of our own custom printing without any Apex regions being involved. And I love this. I feel like this. I wish this API would have existed way sooner. I'm super happy that it is here now, and I think that the Apex team did a fantastic job in delivering this feature. So let's take a look at what we get. And we're getting close on time here, so I'm gonna look a little bit quickly. I have my interactive report, which has filtering and formatting that has been applied to it. And really, the awesome piece here is that I can say that I want to download my report, and I can pick a format, either Excel format, which we now have, or I could pick PDF. I'm going to pick Excel first and open this. And you should see that I get my formatting mirrored here, which is fantastic. And of course, I can do the same thing for PDF. I get my formatting mirrored here. Fantastic. And then the other flag that we have here that I like, I guess there's two. If we don't want this formatting, we just want the raw data, that's fine. We just say data only. And now what will happen is it'll just give us the data without any special formatting. There we go. Okay, no formatting applied. And then, of course, we could send this as an email if we wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but you could. One problem that this actually has caused is previously we used to have leading zero solutions that I've seen kind of around the internet, where you would kind of use a little bit of a hack here, where you would or the problem is that you would have leading zeros, such as with like a zip code or something. You would download the data, and then those leading zeros would be truncated because it would ultimately convert it to a number. And the way that you would get around that is that you would ultimately, you'd have two different columns, and when you click download, the one that you would get would be this one here. Well, if I do this and I say download, and I'll open this, I still get this. The hack that I was trying to exploit no longer works. Uh-oh. So how do I deal with this? Well, I'll say, well, if I go to this one and I have my zeros and I just say download, notice that I get all my leading zeros. So what did I do differently? The one thing that I did here is that it's very subtle. I have my two different columns, and this is just out of the box classic report. In this case, what I did under my attributes is I turned off CSV export. We're not using that anymore. And instead, I enabled printing. And in my printing configuration, I just changed my link from, instead of saying print, to say download, and I changed the format to Excel. And now Excel is handling my formatting for me, and it does a really good job at respecting the data type. Notice that this is not a CSV, it is an XLS file. And we also have a friendly API that we can interact with. So that'll probably be the last thing I get to talk about. The API that we have, we can very easily submit a page for processing. And I could say downloads to get some data. Notice that it's currently downloading the data in a CSV format. Say OK. I get my data. And I could also download my data as a PDF. I open and I get a PDF. Well, how did this come about? This is almost an exact copy of what is provided on the Apex website with one little modification. All I did is I just added a little case statement here that would look at the button that I clicked on, and if the button name was download PDF, then it would change the formats to PDF. We open up a context for a data source. We point that context to the Apex Data Export API, and we say this is what we'd like to get, and specifically the format that we'd like to get it in. And then finally, we'll go ahead and say we would like to download that file or export that data for me, please. So you can see it's broken up into nice little different segments. Of course, you can define this query all sorts of different ways, and we're not going to explore the many options that you could use. Just note that yeah, it's piggybacking off of all of the fantastic work of the Apex exec contexts. And again, I think I mentioned this when context first showed up. I said I was really excited to see how these contexts are going to change the way in which we write PL SQL code. And this is just another step, I think, in the right direction for how we write reusable, maintainable, great Apex code. Unfortunately, I was a little slow. I'm not going to talk too much about the faceted search. Just know that we have a super easy checkbox item that's super awesome. If you watch the John Snyder's part in the new features video, I think he talks a little bit about that. So in summary, we have the fantastic new Redwood UI, but we lost support for IE in doing that. So evaluate whether or not you're ready to upgrade or not. Double typo. We have the Monaco Editor, and we have the cards report for super easy display of information, and the Apex Data Export API for exporting information. And I would just say, I feel like now it's a really good time to be an Apex developer. We're getting all the nice little goodies that we need to write the code to support the features that our users are asking for. And whenever I can just call an API or an interface that does all the heavy lifting, you know I'm going to leverage that API instead of writing all that code by hand. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay safe and healthy out there. Until next time.